began with a routine financial review that should have passed unnoticed. Instead, it triggered a chain reaction that sent shockwaves through palace corridors. What Princess Anne reportedly uncovered was so alarming that senior advisors allegedly halted meetings, sealed files, and summoned royal lawyers behind closed doors. At the center of the storm stood Queen Camilla and a financial arrangement few expected to see. Questioned. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, there seemed to be nothing extraordinary about the report that landed on Princess Anne's desk. Financial reviews were a normal part of palace operations, carried out quietly and efficiently, rarely attracting attention beyond a small circle of trusted officials. But according to palace insiders, this review was different from the very beginning. What started as a standard examination of financial records allegedly revealed a pattern that immediately raised concerns among royal overseers. Small details that might have gone unnoticed under normal circumstances reportedly began connecting in ways that made experienced advisors uneasy. The deeper they looked, the more difficult it became to dismiss the findings as simple administrative irregularities. Sources familiar with the situation claim that Anne was initially briefed by royal financial overseers who had encountered an unusual arrangement linked to Queen Camilla. At first, there were questions, then there were concerns. Before long, those concerns reportedly evolved into demands for answers. Palace officials who had spent decades navigating royal affairs allegedly found themselves examining records repeatedly, searching for explanations that never seemed to fully satisfy them. What troubled them was not necessarily a single document or transaction, but the growing sense that important pieces of a much larger puzzle remained hidden. As whispers spread through private offices and secure meeting rooms, internal reviews reportedly uncovered inconsistencies requiring further investigation. Every answer seemed to create another question. Every clarification appeared to expose another uncertainty. Senior aides, normally calm and composed under pressure, allegedly began expressing fears about the potential consequences if the matter ever reached public attention. The monarchy had weathered scandals before, but this situation carried a different kind of risk. It involved trust, accountability, and the management of royal affairs at the highest levels. Meanwhile, royal lawyers were quietly brought into the process. Their involvement alone was enough to signal that the issue had moved beyond routine administration. Historical agreements were reportedly retrieved. Old records were reviewed. Legal teams allegedly worked behind the scenes to determine whether procedures had been followed correctly and whether approvals had been granted through proper channels. The atmosphere surrounding the inquiry grew increasingly tense as each new discovery appeared to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Palace insiders claim the pressure soon created divisions between Anne's team and advisors believed to be close to Camilla. Meetings reportedly became more guarded. Discussions became more cautious. Individuals who once worked together without friction allegedly found themselves standing on opposite sides of a growing dispute. Questions circulated about who had authorized certain financial decisions, why they had been approved, and whether everyone involved fully understood their long-term implications. Yet no clear answers emerged. Soon, rumors began spreading throughout royal households. Staff members whispered about sealed reviews and confidential legal assessments. Courtiers exchanged theories behind closed doors. Some believed the concerns would ultimately prove insignificant. Others feared they represented the beginning of something far more serious. What united both sides was the growing realization that this story was no longer confined to accounting records and administrative procedures. Something larger was beginning to surface beneath the institution's carefully maintained image, and with every passing day, the pressure intensified. But what initially appeared to be a routine accounting concern soon revealed connections reaching far deeper into royal finances than anyone had imagined. The deeper officials looked, the more questions appeared. Every answer seemed to lead to another document, another signature, another unexplained decision. What started as a single review reportedly evolved into a sprawling examination of financial records stretching back. In the days that followed, the atmosphere surrounding the inquiry reportedly shifted from concern to suspicion. What had initially seemed like a narrow review of a handful of financial arrangements began expanding in unexpected directions. Investigators allegedly discovered that the records they were examining were connected to a much larger framework of agreements, approvals, and transactions that stretched across multiple years. Each file appeared to open the door to another. Each explanation seemed to reveal an entirely new layer of complexity. Those involved reportedly found themselves moving deeper into a maze of financial paperwork where nothing appeared as straightforward as it first seemed. According to Palace insiders, review teams soon encountered a network of agreements so extensive that even experienced officials struggled to understand the full scope of what they were seeing. Documents referenced earlier approvals. Earlier approvals pointed toward separate reviews. Separate reviews led investigators toward additional correspondence that had never attracted significant attention at the time. The growing paper trail allegedly created a sense of unease among those tasked with untangling it. Some believed they were uncovering nothing more than administrative complications. Others feared they were witnessing evidence of a system that had operated with far less scrutiny than many had assumed. As investigators pressed forward, attention reportedly turned toward records that appeared to have received limited internal examination in previous years. That discovery alone raised new questions. Why had certain agreements avoided deeper review? Were they considered routine at the time, or had important details simply been overlooked? Palace accountants allegedly began requesting additional documentation in an effort to verify earlier decisions. Yet obtaining clear answers proved more difficult than expected. Some records appeared incomplete. Others reportedly referenced supporting materials that were no longer immediately available. Instead of resolving uncertainties, the search often created new ones. Meanwhile, Princess Anne's advisors reportedly adopted an increasingly firm position. According to sources familiar with internal discussions, they insisted that every relevant document be reviewed and every unanswered question addressed. Transparency, they argued, was essential. Anything less risked damaging public trust if details eventually emerged beyond palace walls. That concern soon became impossible to ignore. Senior officials allegedly began discussing the potential consequences of public scrutiny, recognizing that perception could become as important as the facts themselves. Even if no wrongdoing were ultimately established, the appearance of unanswered questions carried its own dangers. The inquiry soon expanded beyond recent records. Historical, financial decisions reportedly came under renewed examination as investigators attempted to understand how certain arrangements had evolved over time. What had once been accepted without challenge was now being reevaluated through an entirely different lens. Decisions made years earlier suddenly appeared far more significant. Connections that once seemed ordinary now demanded explanation. As the review widened, disagreements reportedly emerged among senior staff regarding how aggressively the investigation should proceed. Some argued for caution, fearing institutional damage. Others believed hesitation would only deepen future problems. At the same time, legal experts quietly began preparing recommendations based on the growing volume of information. Their involvement signaled that the situation was entering a new and potentially more serious phase. What had begun as a financial review was steadily transforming into something much larger, a test of accountability, oversight, and trust at the highest levels of royal administration. Yet, despite all the documents, approvals, and financial records being examined, investigators increasingly sensed that the true significance of the story might not lie within the paperwork at all. Hidden behind every transaction were individuals, relationships, and decisions that carried consequences far beyond accounting ledgers. Yet the most explosive discovery was not hidden within the numbers themselves, it was buried within the names connected to them. For years, Princess Anne had built a reputation for discipline, caution, and unwavering loyalty to the institution. But according to palace whispers, Something about these findings convinced her that silence was no longer an option. The discovery that certain names appeared repeatedly throughout the growing collection of financial records reportedly changed everything. Until that point, the investigation had focused largely on procedures, approvals, and administrative decisions. Now, however, attention was shifting toward the individuals connected to those decisions. According to sources familiar with the review, Princess Anne became increasingly concerned that unanswered questions could no longer be dismissed as routine complications. The issue had evolved beyond paperwork. It had become a matter of responsibility, accountability, and trust within an institution built upon public confidence. Those who have followed Anne's royal career often describe her as someone who avoids unnecessary confrontation. She had spent decades earning a reputation for hard work, discretion, and unwavering dedication to duty. Unlike others who sought attention, Anne reportedly preferred results over headlines. Yet palace insiders claim the seriousness of the findings compelled her to take a far more active role than anyone expected. Rather than relying solely on advisors, she allegedly began monitoring developments personally, requesting updates, reviewing assessments, and pressing for greater clarity regarding the unanswered questions that continued to multiply. As the inquiry intensified, questions surrounding oversight reportedly became impossible to ignore. Who was responsible for monitoring certain arrangements? Had proper reviews taken place at every stage? Were key approvals granted with complete information, or had important details escaped scrutiny? These were no longer theoretical discussions. They were questions that demanded answers. Trusted advisors allegedly presented assessments that painted an increasingly troubling picture, warning that unresolved concerns could eventually create serious consequences for the institution itself. While none of the findings provided definitive conclusions, the pattern emerging from the investigation reportedly left many senior officials deeply unsettled. The atmosphere within palace meetings soon grew noticeably strained. Discussions that once focused on administrative matters reportedly transformed into tense exchanges marked by growing frustration and uncertainty. According to insiders, some officials argued that the concerns were being overstated and that the review risked creating unnecessary controversy. Others believed exactly the opposite. They warned that failing to fully investigate the matter would create even greater problems in the future. The divide between those positions allegedly widened with every new briefing. Supporters believed to be close to Camilla reportedly dismissed many of the concerns as exaggerated interpretations of ordinary financial arrangements. They argued that complex administrative systems naturally generated confusion, and that investigators were reading too much into incomplete information. Yet Anne was reportedly unconvinced by those reassurances. Sources claim she insisted that every document be verified, every approval examined, and every unanswered question addressed before any conclusions could be reached. For her, uncertainty itself had become part of the problem. That determination reportedly created growing divisions throughout the royal household. Staff members who had once shared common goals allegedly found themselves aligned with competing perspectives. Some viewed the review as a necessary exercise in transparency. Others feared it threatened to open old wounds and create damaging headlines. The tension was no longer confined to legal teams and financial experts. It had spread throughout the institution, affecting relationships, loyalties, and internal dynamics. Meanwhile, lawyers were reportedly instructed to prepare increasingly detailed reports based on the expanding investigation. Their task was not simply to review documents, but to build a comprehensive understanding of how decisions had been made, and whether existing safeguards had functioned as intended. Each report added another layer to a story that seemed to grow more complicated with every passing week. And as the volume of information expanded, one realization became impossible to ignore. The inquiry was moving toward a crossroads where simple explanations might no longer be enough. As pressure mounted behind palace walls, the question was no longer whether there was a problem, but how large it might become. The moment royal lawyers became involved, everything changed. What had once been whispers among aides reportedly transformed into a formal process capable of reshaping relationships at the highest levels of the monarchy. Until that point, much of the controversy had existed in a space between suspicion and certainty. There were questions, concerns, and growing unease, but there was still room for competing interpretations. The arrival of royal lawyers changed that reality overnight. According to palace insiders, the inquiry was no longer being treated as a matter of internal concern alone. It had entered a new phase 1 governed by procedures, documentation, and legal scrutiny. Every decision now carried greater weight. Every unanswered question became more difficult to ignore. What had begun as a financial review was steadily evolving into a full-scale examination of how authority had been exercised behind palace walls. Legal teams reportedly began dissecting financial agreements line by line, searching for explanations hidden within years of records and correspondence. Documents, once viewed as routine, suddenly attracted intense attention. Approvals were reviewed. Timelines were reconstructed. Internal communications allegedly became subjects of interest as investigators attempted to understand not only what decisions had been made, but why they had been made in the first place. According to those familiar with the process, lawyers were determined to eliminate assumptions and replace them with evidence. Yet with every document reviewed, the story appeared to become more complicated. Requests for clarification reportedly started arriving across multiple departments. Officials were allegedly asked to explain procedures, confirm timelines, and account for decisions made years earlier. Some questions were straightforward. Others proved far more difficult. Certain answers generated additional inquiries, creating a cycle that seemed impossible to contain. Senior advisors soon found themselves coordinating responses in an effort to maintain consistency as scrutiny intensified. What once appeared to be isolated concerns were now interconnected pieces of a much larger puzzle. At the heart of the growing controversy were questions surrounding authorization procedures. Who approved key arrangements? What oversight mechanisms had been applied? Were established safeguards followed at every stage? These questions reportedly dominated internal discussions. While some officials maintained confidence that explanations would eventually emerge, others feared that the longer the review continued, the greater the potential consequences could become. The uncertainty itself was becoming a source of pressure. As the investigation widened, multiple palace departments were reportedly drawn into the process. Financial officials, legal advisors, administrative staff, and senior household figures all found themselves connected to a review that no longer appeared confined to a single issue. The expanding scope of the inquiry created an atmosphere of growing anxiety. According to insiders, many staff members became increasingly concerned about the possibility of damaging leaks. The royal household had spent generations protecting its image through discretion and discipline. Now, the fear was that fragments of an unfinished story might escape into public view before the full picture could be understood. Meanwhile, lawyers reportedly continued demanding complete documentation. Partial records were no longer sufficient. Informal explanations no longer carried the same weight. Every claim required support. Every timeline required verification. Every decision required context. The pressure generated by those demands rippled through the institution. Senior officials allegedly worked long hours attempting to satisfy requests while simultaneously managing the growing tension surrounding the inquiry. What made the situation particularly explosive was that no clear resolution seemed to be in sight. Instead, every effort to establish certainty appeared to uncover new layers of complexity. Relationships became strained. Trust was tested. Long-standing alliances reportedly faced challenges they had never encountered before. The investigation was no longer merely examining financial matters. It was exposing deeper questions about influence, responsibility, and the balance of power within the monarchy itself. And as internal pressure reached unprecedented levels, another conflict was quietly beginning to emerge beneath the surface, one that had far less to do with legal documents and far more to do with loyalty and ambition. But while lawyers searched for answers, Another battle was unfolding, one driven by loyalty, power, and competing visions of the monarchy's future. The financial controversy quickly became something much larger. It was no longer simply about documents or transactions. It became a test of influence inside an institution already struggling with uncertainty and change. What had begun as a review of financial records was now evolving into something far more dangerous. The legal questions remained important, but behind them another conflict was taking shape, one rooted in loyalty, power, and competing ideas about the future of the monarchy. According to palace insiders, the investigation had exposed divisions that had existed quietly for years. The financial inquiry had merely brought them into the open. Suddenly, conversations that once took place behind closed doors were influencing decisions throughout the royal household. Every development seemed to force people to choose a side. As the controversy deepened, different palace factions reportedly began taking increasingly firm positions. Supporters of Princess Anne argued that accountability was essential regardless of rank or status. They believed that unanswered questions could not simply be ignored because they involved powerful figures. According to sources familiar with internal discussions, Anne's allies viewed the inquiry as an opportunity to reinforce standards that had long protected the institution. For them, the issue extended beyond any individual. It was about preserving trust at a time when public confidence could not be taken for granted. On the opposite side, those believed to be supportive of Camilla reportedly argued that procedures had been followed appropriately, and that much of the controversy was being fueled by speculation rather than facts. They warned that aggressive investigations risked damaging relationships within the royal household and creating unnecessary instability. To them, the growing scrutiny felt disproportionate to the concerns that had originally triggered the review. What some described as accountability, others reportedly saw as escalation. The divide quickly spread beyond legal teams and advisors. According to insiders, long-standing tensions that had remained dormant for years suddenly resurfaced. Old disagreements regarding influence, authority, and decision-making allegedly reappeared in conversations across the institution. Individuals who had once worked together without conflict now found themselves defending opposing positions. Trust became harder to maintain. Every new development seemed to deepen existing fractures rather than heal them. At the center of the storm stood King Charles. Sources claim he faced mounting pressure from multiple directions as competing voices urged different courses of action. Some advisors reportedly encouraged a cautious approach designed to minimize disruption. Others argued that hesitation would only create greater problems in the future. The king's position became increasingly difficult. Every decision carried risks. Every delay invited criticism. Every attempt to balance competing interests seemed to satisfy no one completely. Meanwhile, senior staff allegedly worked tirelessly to prevent the controversy from spilling beyond palace walls. They understood that perception could become as damaging as reality. The monarchy's strength had always depended upon an image of stability, continuity, and discipline. Now that image appeared vulnerable. As rumors continued circulating, concern reportedly grew regarding how the public might react if details emerged before the inquiry reached its conclusions. That concern intensified as media interest began to grow. Journalists reportedly started hearing fragments of the story from different sources. Questions increased. Speculation expanded. Commentators searched for clues about what was unfolding behind the scenes. Although few details had become public, the mere existence of an internal investigation was enough to fuel curiosity. The pressure generated by that attention added another layer of urgency to an already volatile situation. For many within the institution, the greatest fear was no longer the investigation itself. It was the possibility that the monarchy's reputation could suffer lasting damage, regardless of the final outcome. The battle had become larger than financial records, larger than legal reviews, and larger than personal rivalries. It had become a struggle over credibility, authority, and the public image of the crown itself. And just as officials hoped the situation might finally be moving toward clarity, An unexpected development reportedly changed everything once again. And just when many believed the situation could not become more explosive, a new revelation reportedly emerged from the archives. Hidden among years of correspondence and financial records, officials reportedly uncovered information that changed the direction of the entire inquiry. Suddenly, earlier decisions looked very different under the light of fresh scrutiny. What had once been considered a structured and manageable review reportedly shifted into a far more complex phase, the moment archived materials were brought forward. According to insiders familiar with the investigation, the newly uncovered records did not simply add details, they reframed the entire narrative. Decisions that had previously been accepted without question now appeared open to interpretation. Timelines that once seemed straightforward began revealing gaps that demanded explanation, and approvals that had been assumed routine suddenly became central points of investigation. As review teams examined the archived documents more closely, the sense of urgency reportedly intensified. Certain records appeared to provide critical context that had not been fully considered in earlier stages of the inquiry. These materials allegedly connected previously isolated decisions into a broader pattern, forcing investigators to revisit conclusions they had already begun to draft. What once felt like progress now became uncertainty again, as every layer of understanding was re-evaluated in light of this new information. Questions surrounding approval processes quickly grew more intense. According to palace sources, investigators began focusing on how specific decisions had been authorized and whether the correct channels had been followed at every stage. Each discovery appeared to widen the scope of inquiry rather than narrow it. Royal lawyers reportedly expanded their investigation in response, seeking clarity across multiple departments and requesting further verification of historical actions. What had begun as a financial review was now evolving into a comprehensive institutional examination. Senior officials allegedly found themselves drawn into urgent discussions as the implications of the archived material became clearer. Meetings that were initially scheduled as routine updates turned into high-pressure exchanges about risk, responsibility, and potential outcomes. Some officials reportedly urged caution, warning that premature conclusions could destabilize the situation further. Others argued that delaying responses would only deepen uncertainty and fuel speculation. The tension between these positions reportedly created an atmosphere of constant strain within palace operations. Meanwhile, media speculation continued to grow stronger. Although official details remained tightly controlled, fragments of information began circulating beyond palace walls. Commentators and insiders alike attempted to interpret the significance of the ongoing review, leading to increasing public curiosity. Each new rumor added weight to the perception that something significant was unfolding behind the scenes, even if the full picture remained concealed. The absence of clear answers only amplified the intensity of speculation. Inside the palace, aides reportedly began preparing for potential consequences that could extend beyond internal administration. The realization that archived records had reopened key questions led to heightened concern about how the situation might develop if more details became public. Every department appeared to operate under increased caution, aware that any misstep or miscommunication could escalate the situation further. The atmosphere was described as one of careful restraint mixed with growing unease. At the same time, calls for transparencies reportedly became louder. Some voices within the institution argued that only a clear and open explanation could restore confidence and prevent further speculation. Others believed that releasing too much information too soon could create unnecessary confusion. This tension between openness and control became one of the defining struggles of the moment, shaping how decisions were made as the investigation moved forward. As the inquiry expanded in scope and intensity, one reality became impossible to ignore. The discovery of archived material had not resolved uncertainty, it had deepened it. What once seemed like a contained issue had now evolved into a layered and unpredictable situation with far-reaching implications. And as investigators prepared to take the next step, the entire process moved closer to a decisive turning point. Yet the greatest challenge was still ahead, because the investigation's conclusions would ultimately land on the king's desk. Caught between family loyalty and institutional responsibility, King Charles reportedly faced one of the most difficult decisions of his reign. Every choice carried consequences, and every delay seemed to deepen the controversy. Inside the palace, the atmosphere had reportedly grown heavier with every passing briefing. Legal teams were now delivering structured updates, each one more complex than the last, outlining interpretations of agreements, historical approvals, and procedural concerns that could no longer be ignored. According to insiders, Charles was no longer dealing with a contained administrative matter. He was confronting a widening institutional challenge that touched the very foundation of how authority had been exercised within the royal household. Every document placed before him seemed to demand not just understanding, but judgment. Advisors reportedly found themselves divided, offering competing recommendations that reflected the growing uncertainty within the institution. Some urged a firm, corrective approach, arguing that clarity and accountability were essential to restoring stability. Others warned that decisive action could fracture already strained relationships and intensify public scrutiny. These opposing perspectives created an atmosphere of hesitation, where every proposed solution carried both promise and risk. The king, positioned at the center of it all, was left navigating between caution and urgency, with no clear path that would satisfy every side. As discussions continued, family tensions allegedly became more visible than at any other point in recent memory. What had once remained behind closed doors was now reportedly surfacing in subtle but unmistakable ways. Alignments within the royal household appeared to shift depending on perspective, with loyalty and institutional duty pulling in different directions. Princess Anne's position remained firm and uncompromising, emphasizing structure, accountability, and the long-term integrity of the crown. Meanwhile, Camilla's supporters reportedly focused on defense, consistency, and the belief that established processes had been correctly followed. The contrast between these positions created a widening emotional and strategic divide. Beyond internal disagreements, broader questions about royal governance began to dominate discussions. Officials reportedly debated not only specific financial concerns, but also the systems that allowed such complexities to develop over time. The issue was no longer confined to individuals or isolated decisions. It had become a reflection of how authority, oversight, and responsibility were distributed within the monarchy itself. This shift in focus intensified the pressure on leadership, as every conclusion drawn from the investigation now carried implications far beyond the immediate controversy. Public confidence also emerged as a central concern. According to palace sources, advisors repeatedly emphasized that perception would shape the long-term impact of the situation as much as any internal resolution. Even without formal conclusions, the existence of deep internal scrutiny risked influencing how the monarchy was viewed externally. This awareness added another layer of urgency to Charles's decision-making process, where timing and tone mattered almost as much as outcome. Through it all, Princess Anne reportedly remained unwavering in her stance, continuing to push for clarity and full verification of facts, regardless of hierarchy or sensitivity. Her position added further weight to the unfolding situation, reinforcing the seriousness of the concerns being examined. At the same time, Camilla's camp continued to defend its actions, insisting that interpretations were being stretched beyond their intended meaning, and that procedural integrity had not been compromised. These opposing narratives only deepened the strain within the institution. As scrutiny increased, the monarchy found itself under growing examination from every direction: legal, internal, and public. Each layer of pressure reinforced the others, creating a situation where even small developments carried amplified significance. The king, already under immense strain, was forced to consider not just immediate resolution but long-term consequence, knowing that whatever direction he chose would define the tone of the institution moving forward. But the final chapter would not be written by rumors, lawyers, or advisors. It would be determined by what happened next inside the palace itself. The controversy that began as a quiet financial inquiry had evolved into a defining royal crisis. Careers, reputations, and relationships reportedly hung in the balance as the monarchy confronted difficult questions about accountability and trust. What made this moment so extraordinary was not just the scale of the investigation, but the emotional weight it now carried inside the palace walls. According to insiders, the final stages of the review were approaching with a sense of inevitability that could no longer be ignored. After weeks of layered inquiries, archived discoveries, and escalating legal scrutiny, the process was reportedly nearing completion. Yet instead of relief, there was tension, because everyone understood that conclusions would not simply close the matter, they would define it. Palace officials were quietly preparing for multiple outcomes, each one carrying its own consequences. Some expected procedural clarifications, others anticipated structural recommendations, and a few feared reputational shockwaves that could reshape internal dynamics for years. Behind closed doors, contingency discussions reportedly intensified, with careful attention given to timing, communication, and the delicate balance required to maintain institutional stability. Nothing was being left to chance, because nothing about the situation felt predictable anymore. At the same time, public attention had reached its highest point. Although official details remained limited, speculation had grown into a constant presence around the monarchy. Every rumor, every leak, every fragment of interpretation added pressure to an already fragile environment. The institution that had long relied on discretion and distance now found itself under relentless scrutiny, where silence was no longer neutral. It was interpreted, analyzed, and questioned. Inside this pressure-filled environment, Princess Anne's actions reportedly continued to reshape internal discussions. Her insistence on verification, accountability, and procedural clarity had become a defining force in how the inquiry was being handled. Supporters viewed her stance as necessary discipline at a critical moment, while others saw it as a catalyst for escalating tension. Either way, her influence could no longer be ignored. It had altered the tone of conversations and shifted the direction of decision-making in ways that extended far beyond the original scope of the review. Despite mounting developments, questions about transparency remained unresolved. According to palace sources, there was ongoing debate about how much information should ultimately be disclosed and how much should remain within institutional boundaries. This uncertainty created a lingering sense of instability, as even those involved in the process struggled to define where resolution would truly begin. The absence of clear closure kept tensions alive, feeding speculation both inside and outside the palace. Meanwhile, Camilla continued to face sustained scrutiny from critics who questioned interpretations of earlier decisions and financial arrangements. Supporters within the institution reportedly defended her position, emphasizing procedural continuity and established practices. Yet the controversy itself had already taken on a life of its own, shaped as much by perception as by fact. In the middle of it all, reputations were being tested under a level of attention few within the royal household had ever experienced. King Charles, confronted with the full weight of the unfolding crisis, reportedly focused on preserving stability above all else. Every decision carried the risk of further disruption, and every delay risked amplifying uncertainty. His position required constant balancing between competing pressures, where institutional continuity, family dynamics, and public expectation all converged into a single unresolved challenge. It was a burden that left little room for certainty and even less for comfort. As the monarchy moved through this turbulent moment, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted. The institution was entering a new chapter 1, defined not by quiet tradition alone, but by heightened caution, scrutiny, and oversight that would likely shape its future decisions for years to come. Because in the House of Windsor, secrets may survive for years, but eventually every ledger is opened, every question is asked, and every legacy is judged. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.